Hey everyone, my name is Matt.
And I'm Matthew Morris.
And I'm coming to you here from my shop in very, very cold Minnesota. It's a very cold day today.
And it's 80, sunny, and beautiful here in Southern California. Sorry, Matt, but I couldn't help but tell you that.
You're lucky, it's 2 degrees here.
Yeah, no, that's 78 degrees cooler than me. Congratulations.
Thank you, I appreciate winning this coldness competition.
So what are we here for today?
Today we're going to be talking about grain and how to use it in your projects, or how we use it in our projects, and just the idea of paying attention to grain. But before we get into that, I thought we'd kind of talk a little bit about the show itself, since we really kind of jumped into this thing with that first episode and we didn't really talk a lot about like what we're planning to do with the show. So I thought we'd at least give some background on why we started the show and, you know, like when it's going to be released and all that stuff.
Yeah, Matt and I got together over social media at first, so we were each following each other on Instagram, and I was really digging his outdoor patio project and some of the other stuff he was doing.
Same thing for me. I saw Matthew's work on his Gamble House chair, and I thought that was just absolutely incredible. So from an early time, we were both looking at each other's work and really just thinking about how awesome the other person really is at their own craft or their own take on woodworking.
So thanks to the power of the internet, we got together, and now we're here bringing this show to you. So we both have our own channels where we're going to bring you content, but here together we want to bring you different types of content. Why don't you tell us about that, Matt?
Yeah, so the nice thing about it here is that you have both our perspectives kind of in one. And we also have the viewers who are asking all these amazing questions and have all these thoughts about, you know, how they can take what they're doing now and bring it to the next level. So this forum here allows the two of us to get together and really put together a nice concise way, or a nice concise answer of how to take your woodworking to the next level, really. That's kind of the basics of what we're doing here. And it's not just going to be us two. We're going to have guests in the future as well. And hey, Matthew, why don't you go ahead and announce who we're going to have for the next week's or the next episode's guest?
Sure. So we're going to have Paul from Canadian Woodworks. And if you haven't seen Paul's Instagram feed before, you should. But he makes Maloof style or Maloof inspired rocking chairs as well as other pieces of furniture. And we're going to talk to him a little bit about his experience in woodworking from, you know, just starting off to where he is now. And hopefully those stories that will bring you about us, and more importantly, the stories will bring you from other people, will help inspire you to step up to the next level in your woodworking.
Yeah, and if you haven't seen, he's got a YouTube channel as well, so you can check out that and his website. He makes absolutely incredible stuff, and I'm just absolutely blown away every single time I see something he's working on. It's just that next level stuff.
So we're going to bring you the show every 2 weeks. Sometimes it'll be with just the two of us, and sometimes it'll be with a guest as well. And on each show, we'll cover a topic. So Matt, why don't you tell us about today's topic?
Today we're going to be talking about grain, selecting grain for your projects, and generally the best way of doing that so that your projects look a lot nicer and more well composed as a whole, instead of having things that are conflicting. And, you know, just making your whole project look a lot nicer, because that grain is able to flow nicely through all your project pieces, and the color from one part to another matches really nicely as you're going through the whole project.
Right. So for me, my woodworking, as I progressed, when I started doing grain selection on pieces that I built, my stuff became so much better because of that. So we want to try to show you some of that today. So I know, Matt, you're working on an example in your shop of something. Why don't you show that to us?
I have a sample door frame here, and this is just an example of what I would consider a poorly thought out, or not thought out at all, a grain structure to this piece. If you can see, a lot of it here is not straight grained, and with door parts you really want something straight grained, because the focus of the door should be the panel in the middle, and the more distracting the frame itself is, the less focus there is on the panel itself. So here I have an example of a lot of plain sawn figures, so it has a lot of cathedrals, or part of cathedrals as well. I think I did a really nice job of doing a bad job. So down here on this bottom rail I have cathedrals, but I actually cut the cathedrals kind of at their peak, so we have this kind of scoop grain thing going on down here. And then along the sides, I also have the same kind of thing where I have partial cathedrals along this rail. The top has the grain going diagonally this way, so that looks kind of funny.
Where's that knot?
The knot is on this side. The knot's on the back, right there.
Okay.
So that's just another side of it. But I guess it's this panel, or this side here, this is the only one that I would consider close enough to what you're looking for. It's not perfect because, as you can see up the top here, the grain kind of starts to curve in this direction. But what I've done in this case is I put the joint up there, so it actually kind of makes the grain flow into the next piece. And had I thought out this piece up here a little better, or actually I did actually think it up pretty well. It actually connects really nicely, and it kind of connects and flows around to the next piece. So if you're not going to go all straight grained, you can incorporate something like this that actually causes the eye to flow around the frame.
To me, what's important about all of that is picking the right type of wood for the right area. So if we want straight grain, we probably need something that's more quarter sawn. Isn't that right, Matt?
Yeah, you want quarter sawn, and if you want it, if you have the edges on there, you can go for something a little more rift sawn. So the edge, or you have your face of your door, and then you have the edge of the door. If you want straight grain on both those edges, go for something that's closer to rift sawn, so you don't end up with cathedrals on the side of your board.
Right. So I don't know if you mind, I'm going to jump in and show something too. So last week I showed you guys I was working on these cabinets. Now I made a decision in the cabinets that I wanted a quarter sawn material, and the reason for that is, you can see in the walnut here, I wanted everything to be nice and straight grain. It would have been also really cool, which I've done in the past too, to have a cathedral pattern here as well, but that cathedral should be pointing up and not like pointing down, for instance. And if you are going to have the cathedral in here, you may want to have it only pointing in one direction, or you tell me what you think, Matt. I mean, would you want one that's coming down and one that's coming up? Is that a personal preference, or if you could balance them in the middle?
It depends on the piece for me. I've done, let's see if this one has it. The secretary on this side has all the cathedrals going up, but on this side, it starts out with a small part going down on the bottom, but then the 75% of the whole thing is vertical movement of the cathedrals. So for me, I prefer to have the vertical movement be the majority of the panel. So it probably, at no more than a third of it's going to be in the other direction for me personally.
Okay, that makes sense. So and on this cabinet, I'm dropping in one of the face frame pieces right now. And when I was building this, I was, this is the filler strips or the rails that are making this larger face frame here. And I was purposely made these pieces longer because I liked where the grain was going. But up in the top up here, I have grain that's curving in to the face, and I made sure that when I milled these up, I milled them long so I could get everything nice and centered where I wanted it to go, and then cut it. So, part of this process, guys, is that you may not always be able to go to the board that you have in front of you and pull parts straight out of the board from the edge of the board that maybe if you bought S2S lumber or something like that. Yeah, you have to be a little bit more creative. I know on your door for the secretary, remember what was that stuff when you were talking about? Well, you pulled some special parts that were circular grained.
Yes, yeah. So on my secretary for the top rail, let's see if I can get this in the shot here without it going too high. So the top rail here has a curve in it. So in this case, what I wanted was the grain to go in this curve as much as possible. So what I had to find was a part in the tree where the grain actually would behave this way. That's going to be around a knot. So there was a big knot would have been right here in the actual board, and the grain came in a curve around the knot. So by having looked at the grain that way, I was able to pull out the perfect piece for this top rail here. And on the sides, just because I had a board, I didn't just go and I started ripping along the straight edge that was already there. I actually angled the cut on the board so that the grain in my stiles became straight from one end to the other. If I had just put that thing up against the fence and ran the board along there, there would be a few points in that board where the grain would actually exit the side. instead of going straight all the way through.
When you're pulling all this grain out of the wood, are you using templates?
It depends. I used to use them a lot more. Let me grab these ones here. I used to use them a lot more when I was just getting into it. Nowadays, I've developed kind of an eye for it, so I can kind of see what I'm going for now without having to go through all the effort of making a template. But for the upper rails here, I did go ahead and I made a template of the final piece, which is this one here. So that's a positive template. And then I held on to the pieces I cut off from the outside, so I had basically a negative template. So there is the inside there, and then I also had, I'll use one of them here, but I had the outside pieces here that I cut from there. So I could actually lay this whole thing down on the board, remove this positive part, and be left with basically a little window of what the final piece is going to look like as far as the grain direction.
Yeah, same thing for me. Like on the chair, here's a template from the Gamble House chair. This is for the headrest, and the template's actually longer than the final headrest is. But with something like this, and I like using negative templates too. I guess I like spending the extra time. But no, to each their own there. I'll make negative templates, and I'll put the negative templates on the board and move them around so I can find the grain I'm looking for. So here, on my chair, I built this last time, I made sure the grain was running straight through the crest rail instead of having a cathedral pattern going in some odd direction or something like that. So for me, both the positive and the negative templates really help out to find the part in the board that I want to pull.
Now what about color? Because at least for me, I'm a little spoiled because most of the wood I use comes from the same tree or from the same log, and I have all those nice sequential boards, so I don't really have to pay as much attention to color as people that are buying their lumber from a lumber yard, for instance. Then you have to go through the stacks and find things that match, and hopefully maybe they came from the same log or from the same even forest. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Matt. So it depends on the project. So for the Gamble House living room armchair, I actually went out and bought a board of a piece of mahogany. It was, I don't know if it wasn't necessarily a slab, but it was pretty close to it. And it was large enough to handle the entire project in that one board. So all of my parts had really great color matching, even though there actually was differences in the color on one side of the board versus the other side. But for these little cabinets here that I'm doing, I went to the lumber yard and picked up wood there. So basically what I did was, for the sides of the cabinet here, and for the face frame, and then the parts that are going to make up the door, the rails, and so forth, I made sure that all those came from the same board of quarter sawn walnut. The shelf and the top and the bottom all coming from another board that had very similar color to it. So I'll pull the filler strip for the top and then the filler strip for the bottom from that board. So, and I did spend extra time when I was at the lumber yard to make sure that I was trying to get two boards for this cabinet that the color was as close as possible. And the other cabinets, I'm building two of these guys at the same time. I did the same thing. I made sure, and I marked everything at the yard. But yeah, when you have a much larger project, what do you do? Right. That's a good question. I mean, for me, I spend extra time, and I just sit there and I really try to piece through and find boards that look similar to me. And I'll bring a block plane to the lumber yard, and because I'm not always buying pre-surfaced material, I like to buy stuff in the rough. So I'll take the block plane and take a couple of shavings off so I get an idea of what the color looks like on the board in a couple different spots. What did you used to do before you were spoiled, Matt?
So before I was so spoiled and I had the whole tree available to me, I didn't really pay much attention to the grain of the boards, the color, because I wasn't really at that point in my woodworking. The time when I first bought my first batch of rough sawn lumber was about the same time that I became more aware of how to place grain in a project to make it look really nice. And that's the first stack of wood that I bought was just from a guy off of Craigslist. He had a whole bunch of trees cut up, and when he cut them up, he stacked them in the same order they came off the log. And so basically I was just buying sequential boards, a whole stack of them. I bought a couple hundred board feet at that point, and I used that. Before that though, I was using lumber from the home center, and that was just red oak. So what I would do for that is I would go to the actual home center, and I would sit in the aisle, and I would pull out the boards from the racks, and I'd lay them all on the ground, and I'd try and find the ones that would match as far as color went, because that was a little more obvious to me at the time. The grain selection wasn't so much of a thing. It was really a lot more of like that drastic color difference in the wood, where you could really tell that this board is totally different than this one, and it's not going to look so great if you glued them together and made a panel out of it.
So the guys there must have hated you, because did you leave all those 30 boards on the floor, or did you pick up after yourself?
No, I did pick them up, but I got a lot of funny looks from those people that worked there as I was doing that. They always come by in the aisle and be like, "Can I help you with something?" And I'd just be like, "Nope, just looking for the right board for the project," and they would just leave me alone.
Yeah,
and I just put it all back.
That's what you want everybody to believe. I don't believe that at all. I've seen your shop.
If I let them all in the aisle, no one would be able to get through because there'd just be boards. Or, you know what? You know what I did for them? I made them nice wood floors. It's all wood flooring now in the wood aisle.
That's funny. So for me, the earlier furniture, which I guess I'm still building a lot of that too, which is arts and crafts, but style furniture. But I was using a lot of quarter sawn white oak, and one of the nice things about building arts and crafts furniture, stickly pieces and so forth, is there's lots of different ways of finishing them. So you can fume them, which I wasn't doing at the time. So instead I was using an aniline dye and tinting the wood and giving it like a base color, and then coming in with some oil afterwards. And maybe just out of happenstance, it didn't really matter as much, because the base color and then the oil tint after that would really bring everything into a uniform color. You could tell obviously where there was sap, so you would not want to use sap all throughout the pieces. But then actually for me now, sometimes I do try to incorporate sap into the piece, because it just is some pieces, like the dining table I have in my dining room now, that just looks great with those live edge boards. Yeah, but so when I started, I wasn't really paying as much attention. Now, instead of using aniline based water dyes and colored oils, a lot of stuff I do involves mixing different shellacs, flakes, to get the color I'm looking for out of the shellac, be it a garnet with a blonde or some other variety of colors together, and building that tone, and then putting some wax or even colored wax. So for instance, on these cases, they will get a brown colored wax after they get a clear shellac finish on them, and it just really helps tint and tone the entire piece. But so I guess along my journey of looking at different grain doing grain selection, I also expanded my journey as far as finishing options as well, and changing the way I finish my pieces. And maybe it's a different topic for a different day, but I'm gonna ask you the question anyways, Matt. The door. Why don't you grab that door of yours? Now, I think this is really important, guys. What did you do for the panel before you glued everything up?
I pre-finished it.
And why did you do that?
Because this panel is going to expand and contract. And if it was, well, now it's the winter, so it's dry, so it's only going to expand from here in most cases. So this is going to be a lot more important in the summer before this thing shrinks. But if you had finished this afterwards and it shrunk, you would have a little line along the edges here that wasn't finished, didn't have any finish on it, and it would look pretty stupid.
Exactly, and that goes along with grain selection too, not just necessarily and for parts, but how you select the grain in the piece is how the piece is going to move, that part's going to move. So sure, yes. That's very important too. If you want something that's very stable, you want to pick something that's quarter sawn. If you're going to pick something that's more flat sawn, it's going to move across its entire width in this direction much more than it would along its length.
Yeah, that's especially true if you're making really well-fitting doors. If you're trying to make a door with really tight tolerance around the outside, you do not want to use flat sawn lumber for that door, because that little bit of clearance you have along the edges, as soon as this, I mean, it's not going to expand a whole lot, but this would expand across the grain and get wider a little bit, and that's going to take up that space, that really, really tight tolerance space you're trying to go for, and this door is going to get stuck in the opening.
Well, no, and that's definitely something that changes to where the piece is. So here in California, we don't have much humidity variation. We don't really have the seasons like you do. Yeah, well, I know yes, it's a little warm here today, but just in general, so you know, for you have to worry more about wood movement and
oh yes,
than I do. But if I make a piece here and I ship it somewhere else, which happens, you know, I wouldn't say on a regular basis, but you know, enough every year that I think about it.
Yeah, and it's going to go somewhere else, and it's going to change, it's going to move. Yeah,
exactly. So I make a piece here in the middle of summer, and I ship it to New York. When it's the winter, everything is going to change in shape, and I have to think about all those things. So Matt, what do you do? Is there any way people can use a calculator or go online, or what do you do to figure out how much wood movement there's going to be?
Yeah, you can get really scientific with it and really precise with it. That's probably more up your alley. For me, I just kind of do it just based off of experience or based off of what I know is going to happen. Like on a door, I know I don't bother using flat sawn stock or anything close to it on a door frame because I know it's going to move. So I stick with as close. Usually I do quarter sawn, just because I like that really nice straight grain quarter sawn look. I don't really care about what the side of the door is going to look like in most cases, because it's not going to be seen because maybe it's inside or something.
Right.
And I know that quarter sawn stock, that's not going to change across the width. It's going to change in thickness, actually, is what quarter sawn would do. And for a door, that doesn't matter so much, because you want to keep it nice and consistent inside of that door opening there. So yeah, it depends on the project part, but most of the time I just kind of allow for it because I know it's going to happen in most cases. Like on a panel, I just allow, like in this case, in this panel here, this panel is, I think it's just over a foot across, 12 or so inches across. So I gave it about 1/8 of an inch total width here inside of the grooves to expand and contract in there. So the space in between, from groove to groove in here, is 1/8 of an inch wider than the panel.
Right.
So it's got room to move.
Cool. So I think we did a pretty good job today of covering that. Grain direction and wood movement a little bit. We have some questions and answers, or some questions that we want to get some answers to from last week's show. Why don't you start us off on those, Matt?
Yeah, I will. And one last note though is I will leave a link to one of those calculators for like that wood movement thing in the description. So if you want to take a look at the actual like calculations of, if you have this wide of a board and it's going to change this much humidity, how much is that board going to change? So it's useful if you want to take a look at that. We'll leave a link to that down in the description. But let's get into some questions here. So this week's question came from Ross, and he has a 5-inch random orbit sander that's on its way out, and he wants to know about upgrading, if he should go to a 6-inch sander, which is what I have here, and if he should go to a pneumatic sander, and what about dust collection? That's always important as well. So Matthew, how much sanding do you do in your shop? Or do you still sand, or do you do a lot of hand tool finishing?
I do less sanding than I used to. So these days I try to use hand tools more to finish my pieces. There are times though, like maybe I'll use the hand tool to bring the surface up to it's ready for finish, but I may get a ding or a dent in it. And if I do that and I have to use water and steam to pull up the grain, then I'll jump to sanding, and I'll hand sand everything, but with a much higher grit. As far as random orbital sanders, I still have a couple here in the shop. I only have 5-inch models for myself, but I don't have Festools. But so to help myself with collection, for dust collection, I'll take my shop vac and plug that into the sander, because that's really important, making sure you get all that stuff out, and that really helps the paper do its job.
Yes.
So what made you go and get a 6-inch, Matt?
Speed, really. I didn't know it. I mean, that's one of those things you don't know. Like, I had a small rigid, the 5-inch rigid sander for a lot, since I started, and I didn't know any better, really. And then once I got this sander here, I realized how much time I was wasting using that other sander, because this is just so much more fast for whatever reason. Probably mostly because it's a 6-inch sander, but overall it's just a much faster and better experience, especially since I have this paired with the CT Vac. So in that case, there is just about no dust left on the surface after sanding, and there is nothing in the air as well. And the paper on the sander stays really, really clean too. So overall, it's a much better sanding experience by far.
I just haven't made that jump into a large dedicated 6-inch because I'm trying to move away from it. But there are times where you just have to sand. Like if you're doing a large tabletop, I don't know if you have to necessarily. I guess you could scrape it and then hand sand it without a random orbital sander. But it just makes more sense at that time to use a random orbital sander to do the entire tabletop, especially if it's a 9 or 12 foot long table.
It's hard for me to go all like hand tool finishing because the wood that I usually use has knots or end grain in it, so it makes it a lot harder to actually plane that to a nice finished surface. If I do use a hand tool to bring it to a finished surface, it's going to be a card scraper, because it would just be too much work to deal with the grain direction changes and then the changing of the grain protrusion on the surface of the board for a hand plane to really be that great of an experience for me. And I'm sure it's possible, but it's just a lot easier for me at this point to just go over with the sander and be done with it.
Yeah, well, it definitely makes sense. Some stuff all plain, and then other parts of it, like in the chair, for instance, the Gamblhouse chair and the back legs, those were all spoke shaved, but I ended up coming back in on every part actually with 320 grit paper and sanding everything at 320. For me, it saved time. I didn't have to sand all the way up through the grits on all these pieces. I was able to jump to the hand plane on a lot of the pieces and then just hand sand at 320, and that next process of hand sanding for each part didn't take very long at all.
Yeah, that's a good point too. You can save a lot of time by kind of eliminating those rougher grits by going with the hand planes.
Right. So Ross, I don't know if we answered your question, but there's just different ways of approaching it. So 6-inch, it's going to sand stuff a lot faster than the 5-inch. Maybe you won't have as easy a time of finding paper as you would on the 5, but all the home stores pretty much stock 6-inch paper as well.
Yeah, it depends what you go with. Again, I mean, you're gonna spend a lot more money for a 6-inch, especially if you go with a Festool one. And the other part he asked was about the pneumatic sanders, and those are about the same price as well, as if I'm not mistaken. So you're looking at spending a few $100s on a sander just for a sander alone. But I think it's definitely worth it because it's an overall better experience and it's a lot faster. So if you value your time at all, you're going to get that back pretty quickly.
Yeah, and if you get a pneumatic sander, you have to make sure you have a large air compressor as well to power that.
Yeah. And you got to have an air compressor to run that thing too. So maybe you have one already.
Right. And our next episode, we'll have Paul from Canadian Woodworks on, and I'm really looking forward to that. He makes some beautiful Maloof-inspired rocking chairs and other furniture.
I'm really, really looking forward to it as well. I'm just absolutely blown away by the stuff that he's able to produce, so I'm really looking forward to talking to him and meeting him as well. If you are looking for information about the show, you can head over to our website. That's at themattandmatthewshow.com. You can find links to both of our websites there as well. I'm over at mattcremona.com.
And I'm at mmwoodstudio.com. And if you guys are new to the channel, please subscribe. And we really love to hear some questions from you guys for our next Q&A session on the next episode, and some questions you may have for Paul too about his furniture.
Yes, that'd be great as well.
So we'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
See ya.
Bye.